Good evening everyone, my name is Chris Nitzo. This is an Oz Cyclone Chasers Aussie Cyclone update for the 21st of January 2014. Tonight we're going to talk about the tropical low currently over the inland Pilbara district. We're going to talk about the new tropical low that will form over the base of the top end, push west over the Kimberley, and then we're going to talk about the jumbly mess that is in the Coral Sea that will spawn possibly a number of different lows, and at this stage we still don't know what's going to happen with either of them, any of them, but we'll talk about some of the possibilities of the Coral Sea at the end of our broadcast. Alright, let's get into it. She is one hell of a beautiful low, this thing. It has pushed basically all across the desert regions of Australia here in the Western Australia Northern Territory border, pushed at a great rate of knots towards the Pilbara coast, stalled just like the models have said it's done. The models have really done really well with this. It's been beautifully forecast, and we're now moving, it's now moving in a southwest or south-southwest direction, eventually in a south to southeast direction, and will accelerate, but it's still holding excellent structure even as it's to the west of Newman here over the inland parts of the Pilbara and Gascoyne regions. So folks, look, it's dumped a lot of rain. It's dumped 200 to 300 millimeters here in parts, and you can see even now the thunderstorm cloud here is significant way out here to the east in a feeder banding into the tropical low. It's a very strong tropical low. A lot of people label these things as landfoons, which is like typhoons over the land. So it's just a really phenomenal system, and it's caused a lot of rain for anyone to the east of about Karratha. So Port Hedland eastwards, you've had a lot of rain. Karratha westwards, you've had bugger all, unfortunately. But let's have a look exactly where that rain has fallen. Just to the 24 hours until 9 o'clock this morning, we saw 100 plus millimeters here over the inland Pilbara district in the East Pilbara, and we've basically seen 50 millimeters plus along the coast around Port Hedland, which is great rainfall for this time of year, and we've seen just general 25 to 50 mil falls all the way through to Broome from just west of Port Hedland all the way to Broome. So some really good rain, and it's fairly widespread, fairly general over the district. I know there's a lot of people in the Western Pilbara who are a bit disappointed that this hasn't come towards them, but really it was never going to. You were never going to get much rain out of it. We possibly thought you might have got a couple of mils more than you did, but because the system just stalled completely and is now pushing in a south direction, you're not going to see any rain from this system if you haven't seen it already out here to the west. Next, the next system though could be a bit more interesting for you guys out there, and we'll talk about that shortly. Before we do talk about that, I just want to show you how awesome our monsoon is looking right now, and have a look at it here. It streams all the way through from Indonesia to East Timor, all the way through to the top end coastline, all the way through to the far northern parts of Queensland, and then continues way out here to the east, out into the Solomon Islands and into Fiji, even if we went further east. Really, folks, this is an absolutely firing monsoon trough. We don't see it firing for this amount of time very many times through the year. Look, it's been going now for well over a week, and it's going to be going for another week, possibly 2 weeks at this stage. Speaking of that, let's take a look at the MJO. If we take a look at something we posted on social media earlier today, and if you haven't seen us on Facebook yet, please have a look at us, because we do have a lot more frequent updates on our Facebook site, and if you don't have our app, we also update that app as well, so that app comes straight through from Facebook. So if you don't have Facebook, another way to keep in touch with all the latest stuff is our app, which you can download from the Google Store or the iTunes Store. But anyway, going on to this, we have an MJO phase diagram, and we can see here that on this phase diagram we have an MJO pulse that is rapidly intensifying in phases 6 and 7. Now phases 6 and 7 are in the southwest Pacific, so anywhere from the eastern half of Queensland all through to the Dateline is where we're talking with phase 6 and 7. So you can see here the MJO pulse in most of the model guidance, in fact all the model guidance, has a rapidly intensifying MJO pulse. What that all means, folks, for those of you that don't really know much about this stuff, is that we're going to see more westerly winds in the lower levels of the atmosphere, which means a stronger monsoon, and it also means that humidity in the mid-levels of the atmosphere will increase, because that's one of the byproducts of an active MJO phase. Cloudiness increases, the amount of moisture in the atmosphere increases, and so therefore the potential for cyclone formation increases dramatically when we have an active MJO and an intensifying MJO at the same time. So currently over the next week to 2 weeks, we are going to see a very much enhanced period of cyclone potential in the Coral Sea and the southwest Pacific. To a lesser extent, the rest of Australia, the northwestern and northern parts of Australia. But really, the focus of action should become the Coral Sea and southwest Pacific, judging on the MJO increase. Now, if we have a look here in phases 6 and 7 in this diagram, you can see that in phases 6 we have above average rainfall across northern Australia. In phase 7 we still have above average rainfall over northeastern Australia. But in both phases 6 and 7, we actually have these arrows pointing from west to east, which means that the monsoon remains very strong across the northern half of Australia throughout phase 6, phase 7. So really, folks, the next 2 weeks we're going to continue to see a fairly strong monsoon. I know the Bureau in their latest outlook said that the monsoon should weaken. Maybe that's the case particularly for northwestern Australia, but we don't tend to agree with their assessment for northeastern Australia, and we do see that the monsoon will continue over the next couple of weeks through northeastern Australia, the Coral Sea and southwest Pacific. So what does that mean for tropical lows and cyclones, and what are the models picking up on? The WA Bureau today, in their cyclone outlook, and they have been issuing this for a few days now and letting us know that this is going to happen. There's very, very clear model guidance on this, and this is the one part that we are very sure is going to happen. This concept of this new low developing at the base of the top end, pushing to the west and forming into a bit of a tighter low around the Kimberley coastline. So this is what the Bureau is saying about it. However, this weekend a weak low could form off the Kimberley and move westwards. On Monday there is some risk of the low intensifying over the waters north of the Pilbara coast, and that's really what model guidance is showing. How much it intensifies, model guidance still completely in the air with it. The GFS model wants to develop this into a severe tropical cyclone. The European model wants to keep it a low. There's a lot of variability in the strength of the system, but really the track forecast is pretty similar on most of the models, so we'll have a look at some of those track forecasts now. Looking at the 5-day UKMet forecast, we see the tropical low forms really in the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf in about day 2 or 3, and then continues to push in a west to southwest direction right near the Kimberley coastline. And so because of that, we're seeing a lot of rain. This colouring here suggesting a lot of rain right along that coast. Now this is the same area of coast that's received a ton of rain already from the other tropical low that's currently in the inland Pilbara. So this same area is going to get pummeled with rain and monsoons from this particular low as well in the next 5 days or so. So you can see here the track forecast still remaining reasonably weak, though it doesn't really form it into anything significant. But remembering that the waters out here are very, very warm. We'll talk about the actual environmental and atmospheric conditions around there that might be holding it back shortly. But just suffice to say that the waters out here are very warm, so if it can take a dip out there, there is every chance that it will further intensify. But at this stage, up to the end of 5 days, we're not expecting it to, according to the UKMet model. Very similar thoughts from the European. Develops it in the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf. Holds it back a little bit though. Holds it back to about day 4 of the forecast. So day 3 to 4. So we're looking at not forming until Friday or Saturday. And then really pushes it right over the top of the North Kimberley, but once again hugs the coastline here, and we see a lot of rainfall from the system over the North Kimberley, and even parts of the western top end receiving a lot of rain as the system pushes across the base of the top end. So looking like a very wet system, if not quite a strong system at the end of that 5-day period. Looking at the GFS on the Friday, it has generally a broad low here over the top end region, pushing in a westerly direction as we head towards Saturday. We can see that general westerly drift of the tropical low, possibly located right around the Kimberley there by Saturday. As we head to Sunday, the GFS keeps it really, really coastal. Just like every other model at this stage, they keep it very close to the coast. Now that will obviously mean a massive rain potential for this system if it remains this coastal. This is probably more of a rain potential system than the last one that just that stayed inland a little. This one is likely to pummel the coast with rain, particularly to its north in that very fresh monsoonal flow. So looking at that there, it's located somewhere between Port and Broome, and it's pummeling this area with fairly strong winds to the north. Not quite a cyclone though, because it's located over land, or the bulk of it is expected to be located over land. And we'll have a look now at some of those atmospheric conditions, but before we do that, we'll just go one more day through to Monday. And we can see that the GFS model finally decides to push it just offshore off Broome, probably developing into a Cat 1 cyclone there just off the coast of Broome, as the GFS deterministic shows us. But look folks, whether it can or can't get off the coast, and it does have a little bit going against it. Let's have a look at that now. As we head to day 5, this is the European deterministic high resolution model. We can see that the low is located out here in the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf, fresh monsoonal flow to its north. If we have a look at things like wind shear while it's in the JBG, it's under some excellent shear conditions. If we have a look at moisture, it's just a case of really the system has to get itself out of the land area. So if it can get itself over water, it's got moist air around it. You can see this blue colouring here suggests really good moisture levels in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. If we then focus a bit more though on the longer term projection of the system, really this is the issue here folks. This is a wind shear map for Tuesday morning using the GFS model, and to a lesser extent the European model. We actually see off the coast of the Pilbara, we actually see a fair bit of wind shear, 20 to 25 knots of wind shear. So that may be a limiting factor. If the system gets offshore far enough, that wind shear could be a limiting factor. The GFS might be overdoing the wind shear values here. This is the GFS wind shear values. You can see here are going to be much stronger than the European models. So this is your wind shear values down here in knots. Really, cyclones will not form in anything more than about the blue colouring here. So 20 knots is about the cutoff for wind shear, and we can see that a lot of this northern area, especially the GFS, is really hammering it with wind shear, and so that could be a major limiting factor in the system's further development. But we would hate to bet against a northwest WA low pushing offshore and betting against it forming into a cyclone. Normally they do form into cyclones, despite sometimes some horrendous conditions. They seem to just manage to get themselves together. So at this stage folks, we're looking at it being very coastal. We are looking at it pushing in a west to southwest direction, and really not quite sure at this stage whether it'll form into a tropical cyclone. I guess that if you were starting to talk percentage probabilities, we'd be looking at a 20 to 30% probability. The probability would be much higher if we had a much more confident forecast of wind shear, and if we had a much more confident forecast of exactly how far off the coast it's going to go. Here's a look at the Bureau of Meteorology's model on the Monday. We can see that the low located off the coast of Broome, very similar, I guess, in a way to the GFS model. So the GFS and the Access G model, very similar in their position of the low on the Monday. The European model obviously has it a lot further to the north and in that Joseph Bonaparte Gulf area, and then pushes it inland. By the Tuesday, the Access G model forms it into a very weak tropical cyclone off the Kimberley coastline. Sorry, that was off the Pilbara coastline. And Wednesday, the weak tropical cyclone does not develop further. Once again, remembering that the key issue here is that wind shear value. Those wind shear values are going to be pretty high, but we're just not sure exactly how high at this stage. So that will be a limiting factor in the system's further development and deepening. Alright, that's where we're going to leave the WA system. Suffice to say, we're expecting that low to push across the base of the top end into the JBG, into the Kimberley, and then what it does in the longer term, just not quite sure yet. We'll have a better idea of that one as we head towards the weekend. Alright, the next one we're going to talk about is Queensland, and dear oh dear, we have no idea here, and the models have absolutely nothing to show, nothing to give us, because they keep chopping and changing with every single model run. There is zero confidence, can I just stress this, zero confidence in anything and everything you're seeing on computer models in the Coral Sea right now, because they are forming cyclones left, right and centre. They're forming lows left, right and centre. They don't know which low is going to be the dominant feature, which low isn't going to form. They keep chopping and changing. We can confidently tell you there will be a low in the Coral Sea. We can confidently say that in the next week. We just cannot tell you what it's going to do, because we don't have the guidance that tells us what will happen. Now, the best the best thing we can do right now, forget these lows. This one's a cyclone at that stage. This one's a low out here in New Caledonia. But really forget where they are, and let's have a look at the environmental flow, because that's the only thing that we have good guidance on at the moment, is what's happening in the low, the mid-levels and the upper levels around that time. Basically, if we look to the north, forget where the lows are. If we look to the north, we have a nice strong monsoonal flow. 15 to 20 knots around the Coral Sea is a strong monsoonal flow. That's always going to be good for potential low development. Now, coming in from the south, have a look at these winds. Once again, forget where the lows are. Have a look at the colouring here. The colouring here is showing 25 to 30 knots southeasterlies, pushing up, surging up the Queensland coast. So we've got 15 to 20, even a 25 knot northwesterlies coming in on the monsoon. We got 20 to 30 knots southeasterlies coming up. They're going to meet. Where they're going to meet, all hell's going to break loose. We just don't know where they're going to meet. And we just don't know exactly what's going to happen once they meet. Will we see one big dominant low? Will we see one big broad low pressure region? What will happen? We can't tell you. The models don't know. The models chop and change. So you can see here, this is today's model. Today's model says tropical cyclone off the far north Queensland coast. Have a look at what the model was saying for the same period last night. Look at that. Same period. We got nothing. We got a low here in New Caledonia. We got a broad monsoonal trough type low feature out here through the Coral Sea. Just absolutely no idea. So it would be dumb, stupid, and completely ratings driven if we were to try and tell you there's going to be a low off in the there's going to be a cyclone off the coast of Queensland that's going to hit the coast. It would be silly for us to do that. And I mean, really, there's no scientific basis that we can justify at the moment to tell you that this model has got it spot on compared to some of the others. Look, we are seeing a general trend. I'll just show you the GFS model for about the same period. The GFS model in the same period has a tropical low or cyclone out here in New Caledonia. And if we have a look at the latest GFS model for exactly the same period again, we can see that there's a low here in the central Coral Sea. There's another low out here. There's a monsoon trough. What we can tell you is that the Coral Sea will fire. We are very confident in the Coral Sea firing. We just don't know whether it's going to fire around New Caledonia, whether it's going to fire around far north Queensland. We can't tell you that at this long lead time. Alright, so let's assume, now that we've talked about the fact that we don't know where these lows are going to form, let's assume for 1 second that we see a low in here around New Caledonia. The chances are that that low will push in a south to southeast direction if it's located in that area. Out here is a mid-level trough, and you can just see it in the bottom right of your corner of your screen. Now that mid-level trough will pull the low to the south or southeast around it. Now, what makes this very complicated though is right here is a big mid-level high. Now a big mid-level high is going to try to push the system in a westerly direction. So we have competing steering influences. So there is quite a likelihood that this system will push to the south or southeast. The trough leaves and the mid-level high takes its place and pushes it back to the west. There's a very high likelihood of that happening. There's another option here where if this low does continue to push in a south to southeast direction, this high becomes a steering influence of anything that develops in the northern Coral Sea. So anything that develops in the northern Coral Sea should push in a west or southwest direction towards the Queensland coast. Once again though, it just depends on which low fires. And as I say, the model guidance just does not tell us which low is going to fire. Let's take a look at wind shear. Wind shear at the time, around about Monday or Tuesday next week, is going to be moderate in the northern Coral Sea. It's going to be quite low in the eastern and central Coral Sea. It's going to be reasonably high here, just off the Queensland coast, directly east of about Mackay. So really, to really form into something significant, the system needs to remain in this red and purple area of wind shear. So overall, the Coral Sea is going to see favourable conditions around that Monday and Tuesday for further formation and development of a tropical cyclone if the low can be located there by then. If we look at the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, we can see some very dry air pushing into the southern and central Coral Sea, but the northern Coral Sea has a lot of moist air, and so does the eastern Coral Sea out here, and so does the area around Fiji, Vanuatu. So that particular region will see the potential for tropical cyclone formation. Obviously, if we get into this region here, it's going to be too dry for cyclones to form. So that's something else we need to keep in mind. So folks, at this stage, I'm sorry, but we just cannot give you a better guidance than that, because we just don't have it. There's no guidance out there that is reliable enough for us to say there's going to be a low and it's going to hit the Queensland coast as a cyclone, or there's going to be a low and it's going to hit New Caledonia as a cyclone, or there won't be a low at all. Look, one thing we can say is probably that third option isn't going to be right. That the third option, there's going to be something there. We just don't know where it's going to be. We just don't know where it's going to go. All we can do is have a look at what the upper level, mid-level conditions are going to be like. The other thing that we need to stress here in the high upper levels at about 300 hectopascals, around that time we're expecting to see an upper low around the New Caledonian region. So the fact is that if the cyclone or a low develops in the New Caledonian region, it may not necessarily be tropical in nature. Whereas something in the northern Coral Sea, for instance, would be tropical in nature. We see a ridge here again in the upper levels. So this is a ridge that's going to push systems to the west. This upper low is going to push systems in that direction there. So once again, folks, it really depends on which low fires as to which direction it goes. If a low fires in the northern Coral Sea, we'll see it pushing in a southwest or westerly direction. If the low fires in the eastern Coral Sea, we'll see it pushing in a south to southeast direction, at least initially. So that's what we can say with some confidence. So rainfall, folks, rainfall. Now that we've talked about the fact that we can't tell you what the Coral Sea is going to do, rainfall is going to be very, very high over central and inland parts of WA. We're going to see continued moisture streaming into that low from the Northern Territory, so still going to see some good rainfalls here throughout the central Northern Territory base of the top end. We're still going to see some active monsoonal conditions over the far northern parts of the continent. Still no rain for most of Queensland except for the southeast, which might see some pretty severe storms tomorrow. On Thursday, or possibly severe storms I should say, on Thursday we start to see moisture flowing back into the North Tropical Coast, so anywhere sort of just north of Townsville, I think it's Rolling Stone northwards, we should see an increase in rainfall on the Thursday with some lighter showers further south. We're going to see a continuation of active conditions over the north. This tropical low is still going to be dumping a bucket load of rain here over the southern parts of WA. I mean, look at that, 150 to 200 mils for the day down here in an area that receives probably 400 mils for the year. So crazy amounts of rain, really. On Friday, we see the rainfall continuing right along the northern tropical coastline, just pushing down to just south of Townsville there in some lighter falls. Not really penetrating too far inland into the central districts. Still some really good rain down here over the southern and southeastern parts of WA. We continue to see active conditions in the monsoon over the far north, and as we head towards Saturday of your long weekend, we see that rainfall along the tropical coastline decreasing. We see continuation of a good shower and storm activity associated with the monsoon trough across the far north. We see an increase in rainfall over the western top end because of the new low that's pushing into that region there by Saturday. Then once we head from Sunday onwards, or Saturday onwards, we see that really heavy rain possible again over the western top end in an increasing monsoonal flow. Once again, by day 7 or 8, we're expecting that monsoon flow to re-increase in that area. We're expecting that Kimberley low to be located off the Pilbara coast, at least most of the models are, and so therefore that rain pushes offshore with it in the 4 to 8 day period. But we still get a fair bit of rain here along the coastlines, and still just general shower and storm activity across the northern half of Australia, with some heavier falls along the northeast tropical coastline, and once again really dependent on what happens in the Coral Sea as to how long that rain sticks around the tropical and north tropical and far northern parts of Queensland. Also over inland Queensland, we see an increase in shower and storm activity. Finally, we start to see some moisture streaming into trough systems in through here, and the potential for some shower and storm activity over inland Queensland. Although it's not going to be drought breaking, at least it'll be a chance at some rain. Alright folks, thanks for watching. I know tonight's been long, but Jesus, it's complex. It really is complex, especially in the Coral Sea. There's just so much going on out there that we just know something's going to happen. We just don't know where, and none of the models do either. Alright, thanks for watching tonight. At this stage, there's no imminent tropical cyclone threats, so our next update will be on Thursday, the 23rd of January. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll talk to you on Thursday. Remember, if you want to keep up to date a bit more frequently with all the latest model guidance, our Facebook page. If you don't have Facebook, purchase our app, help support us, and you'll be in the loop the whole time. Thanks very much for watching. Talk to you again on Thursday.